All right, welcome back to another episode of the Agendas podcast. I'm excited to be back here with Ben. Ben, what's going on?
How we doing? We made it back. We fixed the Wi-Fi.
We made it back. We had some issues, so this is take two. All right, so if we sound, a little bit off, that's probably why. But
Oh, we're
we're gonna get
starting
back
over?
into it. Yeah, let's start over.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so let's start with the NBA Finals. I don't think we've recorded since Game Two, where Boston took a 2-0 lead. And not much change, honestly, after that. Boston just had control of the series outside of game four, which, they kind of just let their foot off the gas, and Dallas just stomped all over them. I think it was a 40-point win, 30-point win, whatever it was. Um, but that was kind of a blip. People were overreacting to that game that Dallas was going to win in seven now. Like, no, they weren't. A team can lose a game and not be in jeopardy of losing the series, especially when you're up 3-0. But I think the story of this series at the end of the day was, Boston just had a better team flat out. That's what me and Ben predicted, by the way. Shout out to us. All right, we both predicted Boston in five. And it just flat out was Boston was the better team. They didn't have the best player. Obviously, Luka's the best player on the court. But when you have the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, whatever it is, so to throw Kyrie somewhere in there. Although after this series, I'm not so sure. But you're just gonna win the series, and that's what happened. Um, Boston, 2 years ago was in the finals, and they weren't quite ready. Tatum was, younger, Brown was younger, and everything like that. But also, they just didn't have the talent. And Brad Stevens, since being in the front office, he's made some great moves. They added Drew Holiday, Porzingis, Derek White, and it's just taking them to the next level, to the point we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you agree with me, Ben, but if this team played the Warriors from 2 years ago, right? If this Celtics teams played those Warriors, I think they win in five, right? Do you disagree with that?
Absolutely not. I think that championship was a hoax.
Yeah, Ben's a professional Steph Curry hater, so we'll get into that, at some point, maybe in the offseason. But yeah, I definitely think this team would have beaten those Warriors. It's just a much better team. It's a complete team. They kind of dominated the whole NBA season from start to finish, winning 64 games, and people never really wanted to fully buy into them. Partly because people just don't buy in until they see it, right? They're never going to fully buy in. Even with the Warriors back in the day, until they won the championship in 2015, nobody really believed that they were going to win the championship. Like, oh, this is a cute little story, and then they just kept winning and winning and winning. It was like, oh, okay. Now this was a little different because Boston's been, I think, to six of the last eight conference finals. So, it's been building towards this. But they were finally able to get over the hump with the addition of these pieces. And we'll see how long they're able to keep this core, in terms of the long term. I think I saw that everyone's under contract for next year. So next year they should be right back in the mix. But with how the NBA has changed the salary cap, they're going to start losing some of these players, whether it's a Derek White or a Holiday or, some of these players are going to get old. Porzingis obviously was injured this playoffs. It didn't really matter. But you know, in terms of this year, it's an all-time great season from winning 64 games, and I think they lost three playoff games. So, it's definitely up there. Now, eye test wise, I think you'll agree with me on this too, Ben, that they're not an all-time great team, right? That's just discussion that's been thrown around. Like, well, they won 64 games and they only lost three playoff games, so they must be an all-time great team. It's like, no, all-time great teams have all-time great players, right? I mean, Tatum is a great player. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's not in that echelon. Maybe he finishes like top 50 player of all time, something like that. But he's not in that level of when you talk about the all-time great teams. You're talking about Shaq and Kobe Lakers or the KD Steph Warriors or, LeBron Wade Heat or Kareem and Magic, right? That's what you're talking about. You're talking about all-time great teams. And I don't think they're there. Now, if they win, let's say, three of the next four championships, then we're going to be forced to say this is an all-time great team, Ben. But as of this moment, do you feel like that? Do you feel like they're an all-time great team, or it's kind of just, they were the best team this year, and they kind of took the next leap from what they were in the past, but it's not quite that all-time great
Well,
basketball team.
you triggered me there because if they win three more, if they beat the Dallas Mavericks of the world for three more times, then they must be they're that good. It's like, okay, that's a terrible take. Um, but yeah, I mean, this team I would expect would get wrecked by any of those all-time teams that you mentioned. Um,
Ben,
and
name the
that's
team that won three out of four championships that wasn't all-time great
okay. So you're
in
saying
any
correlation
sport.
equals causation.
If you're that level of team, right, to win three out of four, that's just the reality of the world. There's no, again, fact check. Someone could bring it up. Name a team in any sport that won three out of four titles that wasn't all time great. But
If
anyway,
they
well, we can
if
move
they
forward.
won
Then
this
we can move
quality
past
of
that.
finals three times in a row, that would not prove anything more than I mean, it would prove slightly more because they won it. They're doing it consistently, but it doesn't prove they would beat the KD Steph Warriors.
No, obviously there's levels to it. Again, yeah, that's what really separates them is they don't have that all-time great player. Now Tatum maybe takes a leap in the future, but as of now, I don't think they're an all-time great team.
No, I'm not saying they're an all-time great team. And I'm just saying the fact if they would win three more, it depends on the quality of those championships. I mean, we do this all the time where just a championship is a championship is a championship. But if you were in the league with the KD Golden State Warriors and you had to go through that team to win a championship, that's a higher level than Giannis beating the Suns or than this
Hot,
Boston team beating the Mavs. It's not the same. It's not the same quality.
hot take, by the way, these Celtics would push those Warriors to 6 minimum. They just would. They're just a
KD
really good
Golden
basketball
State.
team. Yes,
Okay.
they'd win. They'd get 2 off them. They would. I don't think they'd win, but they get 2 off them. I mean, this is a really good basketball team. There's no holes. Like when you think about teams now, they might have that star power at the top, but
Like what
in
type
terms
of
of
two? Like down like 3-1 and then make it 3-2 and lose, or like
no, it would be 2-2, and then Golden State would win 5 and 6, like that type of series. That's what I think.
okay.
But in terms of like top 6, like how many teams are better all time? We can get into that maybe. But Tatum, Brown, White, Holiday, Porzingis, right, as a 5, like that's a. There's no weakness in the starting 5. Now you have teams with like better, like even the KD Warriors, they were starting like Looney or whatever it was at the 5. Like there is a weakness there somewhat. But again, when you have Steph, Clay, Draymond, and KD, then it doesn't matter. But anyways, that really wasn't the point. Um, but do you see this team, in the future winning some more championships, or do you view this as a one-off where everyone in the East got hurt, Embiid got hurt, Giannis got hurt, Dame got hurt down the line, and they were just able to capitalize and take advantage, or do you think this, potentially this team could repeat, or win a championship in the coming years?
I mean, no, I'm not going to predict anyone to repeat. If the Nuggets didn't repeat this year, so I'm never going to predict anyone to repeat. But I would say it's a better chance that they win the finals next year than the Mavs getting back to the finals. I would say it like that.
Okay, no, that's reasonable. I'll put it like this: the Boston Celtics, what's more likely, they win the NBA Finals next year, or they lose in round 2?
I lose in round two. I would say it's more likely they lose in round two. But
Wow.
I mean, the first round you upped the question you asked me the reverse way in round one though. Now you switch it to round two.
Yeah, well, for the Mavs, I was going to ask. We'll get into that later, round 1 versus the finals. But I think the Celtics team is just better, so that I think it makes it a more interesting question. If you ask me that question, I honestly would say it's more likely that they win the NBA Finals. Now, that might be recency bias, and it probably is. But I think they're bringing back their whole core next year, and the East. I mean, I think the East will get better. They'll probably get healthier. But of the Western teams, they're only going to have to beat one if they make the finals, and I just don't see them losing in round 2, especially because they're probably going to be a top 2 seed, right? So that means you're losing to like a significantly worse team probably. So I just think they have that potential in them as long as they keep the core together. Now in like 3 or 4 years when they start losing these pieces, then I think you'll start to see them come apart. Not that they're going to win three championships, but I would say it's more likely next year that they win the finals than lose in round 2.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think about. I mean, the whole East is a bunch of trash cans, so there is that. We'll see if any moves are made in the offseason.
Yeah, we'll have to get into the offseason. I think that's probably gonna be next episode. But there was injuries in the East also. We forget like the East was not great, but they also Embiid was semi-injured, whatever you want to say. Giannis and Dame were both injured. The Knicks fell apart. So there was injuries down the line. So I think it'll be a more challenging road next season. And like you're saying, repeating is just hard. Everyone thought the Nuggets were a lock to repeat, and they just weren't. They didn't really come that close. So that kind of is what it is. But more into the series, I thought Jaylen Brown deserved the Finals MVP. We talked about this earlier. I don't think he's better than Tatum. He's not, because just the defenses are focusing on Tatum. Tatum has the higher expectations, and the other team goes into the game thinking we got to stop Tatum, not Brown. And that's part of the advantage of the second best player. It's almost like the second best receiver in football, Ben, like a T. Higgins. T. Higgins goes into the game with that advantage of Jamar Chase is taking 2 guys, right? Or with Julio Jones in his prime, and like Mohamed Sanu is like, oh, he's snuck in there. Like, who's this guy? Oh, he has 120 yards. Like, oh, how'd that happen? You know what I'm saying? Do you agree with that parable, that example?
Well, Mohamed Sanu got all that help from Julio, and he still only had 560 yards on the season. So I don't know. I don't know how good Mohamed Sanu was.
Yeah, Mohamed Sanu is probably not a great example for those non-Falcons fans. You're probably like, who the hell is Mohamed Sanu? But T. Higgins, let's put T. Higgins. T. Higgins goes into the game. It's like the other team is like, let's stop Jamar Chase, and then T. Higgins gets his 1,000 to 1,200 yards in the season. And it's like, okay, is T Higgins the number one? Like, no, he's a really good number two that benefits from being next to Jamar Chase.
Say I wouldn't give I wouldn't give Jason Tatum that level of respect. I don't think it's not like Luka or they're not game planning how do we stop Tatum. I would give it. I guess it's more like you have two T Higginses, and so you're not gonna overload to one because the other one's gonna get I would say it's more you have two T Higginses.
Maybe it's an Ayuk and Debo type situation. We'll think of the perfect example later. But my point is, I believe, and I think this is a correct take, as Nick Wright would say, a correct take. That's pretty arrogant, but we'll just go with it for now. That Jaylen Brown deserves both the conference finals and the finals MVP, and Jason Tatum is a better player. I think both things can be true. I was disappointed in Tatum. Talking before the series, I thought he was going to be better than he was. I mean, he was better than he was the last time he was in the NBA Finals, which is a pretty low bar. But if you look at his final stats, it's kind of a jump scare. You kind of have to look at them with your eyes closed, squinting a little bit because it's pretty bad. He's a lot of games under 40% shooting. It just hasn't been that efficient. Now, I think the difference is this year, like even despite his lack of efficiency, he's improved in other areas where he had a couple big assist games. He's rebounding the ball better. Obviously, like Ben was talking about earlier, he wasn't guarding Luka, but outside of Luka, he can defend. Well, like who is guarding Luka? So I think Brown deserved the Finals MVP, and I think it could help his Hall of Fame case later on, potentially maybe a borderline Hall of Fame guy that's like, oh well, he won the Finals MVP, so let's throw him in there. So it probably means more to him, and I think Jason Tatum should have a chip on his shoulder next year, like I'm going to prove that I'm the best player on the team. Not that they really care, whatever it is, but outside of that, I thought Holiday was really good, particularly in the beginning of the series. Now he was in Game 4, he was horrendous, and in Game 5, he didn't have too much of an impact. Derek White was really good. Porzingis had that one good first quarter, and outside of that was kind of meh. But I think it was more of just a team effort from Boston, and then that's what I think it was more than like a superstar. This is like, oh, Jason Tatum proved he's the best player. He could be the best player on a championship team. Like maybe by default he was, but I don't think that's what this series is about. I think it was more about how Boston built this team, and credit to Brad Stevens for making the moves that he did. But what are your takeaways from the Boston side of things in terms of I just like what were your main takeaways from this series?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely think Jaylen Brown deserved Finals MVP. Tatum, particularly in the beginning of the series, played like a trash can. On defense, no one's guarding Luka, but Tatum was getting cooked. It was not even difficult for Luka when Tatum was guarding him. Um, so I think Brown clearly deserved it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of no superstar, but two of the guys showed up every night roughly. You don't know which ones it's going to be, but two of them came every night. Yeah, I mean, listen, in terms of best player on a finals, on a championship team, that to me is a little bit of a silly conversation in certain ways. Yeah, I don't think there was a quote unquote best player. Like for example, Steph Curry when he beat Boston last time, he was the best player. Now, was it by a huge margin? Was he carrying the franchise? No, but still, I would put that in the category as he was the best player. Whereas
Whoa,
here,
whoa, whoa, whoa! We're not letting that slide. We're going to question that. Who was close to Steph Curry? And I'm not saying forget about carrying the franchise, but you said was he the best player by a large margin? No. Who on that 2022 team was close to Steph Curry as a player? Just out of
No,
curiosity.
he was the best player, but you were first of all you were playing a weak team. That's who you were playing in the finals was a weak team, and then also everyone else. You were clearly better than everyone else. Like it's not a debate, but everyone else is. If you were an 8, everyone else is like a 6.5, right? Or whatever. You have a very high. Everyone behind you is very high quality. So like yeah, you're better than them, but you had a ton of help. Maybe not in superstar power, but consistent depth of help.
Let me ask you a question. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Who is the worst player in the NBA that you think could be considered the best player on the championship team? Because Tatum was this year. I think he's
Trae
the
Young.
best player on the championship team, technically, right? So who would be the worst player that you think could be the best player on the championship team?
Trae Young.
Trae Young. All right. All right, it's a fair take. We'll let that sit and marinate a little bit
Well,
from
that's
a
it,
resident
marinate.
Hawks fan.
They were on their way to winning the championship before he injured his leg.
Okay. All right. All right. Simmer
All
down.
right,
Simmer down.
all right, bro. We're talking about the Suns, bro. Put him one-on-one with DeAndre Ayton. Let me know if he doesn't have 60 points a game too. All right.
Giannis had one knee.
I just had one.
All right. Whatever. Forget about it. Let's move on to Dallas side of it. All right, because we can't take anything seriously at this point in life. But again, I don't think we said anything revolutionary. I don't think we're going to be quoted on ESPN tomorrow morning. But we got to give a quick
Anything with
recap.
Trae Young being a good basketball player is going to get quoted.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But let's move on to Dallas because I think Dallas is slightly more interesting potentially just because like career legacy wise, which I know Ben doesn't care about as much as me. I'm the resident legacy career expert guyer. But yeah, I mean Kyrie was awful, flat out awful, as we predicted. By the way, again, I don't get why people are surprised by this. Like people are like, well, Kyrie played bad. Wow, that's shocking. Like, is it? Go look at his playoff resume. It's really not that impressive. I mean, he had that obviously the big shot in 2016, and he's had some good moments with LeBron, and whatever. He's had some good moments even this playoff run, but he is inconsistent. He's an inconsistent player, right? I don't. Whoever expected him to average just like 25 on 50, 40, 90 in the playoffs, he hasn't done that for the most part. So he was awful. The role players didn't step up, but we talked about before the series, like who was stepping up for them this playoffs? It was Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington, right? So is it shocking that PJ Washington came down to earth and Derrick Jones Jr. is not hitting three after three after three? And outside of that, their bench is nobody, right? So is that really surprising? Especially when you're playing a much better defensive team in Boston, right? Sometimes you're playing like a mediocre defensive team and then your role players get open shots and they can get hot. There are NBA players, but when you're playing a plus defensive team, then they're just not. It's not as easy for them to get loose. And Derek Lively, the first couple of games, was trying to figure it out. He had that one game four that was good, but he was mostly irrelevant. That was another point we talked about before the series is the big man play. And Gafford and Lively were kind of no shows in this series, which that was a little disappointing because as good as Boston is, you can control hustle, rebounding, defense, things like that. So that was a little disappointing. And then the main point obviously is Luka Doncic, who I would if I was giving a grade, I would give him like a C plus. I know obviously his numbers are gaudy. Secret guys, if you have the ball the whole game, your numbers are going to be gaudy. Okay, I know, shocking, right? So it just is what it is. In 10 years, the people who watch this series who are Luka Doncic super fans, the Nick Wrights of the world, will be like, oh, well, he averaged 28, 10, and 7. Whatever it was. I don't know. I just made those numbers up. But if you watch the games outside of one half of basketball, he was pretty bad, honestly. Like he just wasn't that impactful. In game 5, he was once they were like all the way out of the game, then he started chucking up shots to try to get his points up and whatever it was. But I was pretty disappointed in Luka. I thought he'd be better. I thought he'd at least win them one game, just from a Luka point of view. Because if you think about it, that game 4 was kind of like that team perspective. We talked about like before the series, what would happen if Dallas was going to win the series, right? And we said Luka would get them a game, and then the team would get them a game potentially, right? I think the team got them a game as a collective, right? But Luka never really had that. I'm scoring 40 points and we're winning this game type of performance. So that was kind of disappointing. And he's firmly out of the best player in the world conversations. I don't see an argument for him being better than Jokic, despite him making it farther than Jokic. But best player in the world, we'll have to get to that a different day. But from the Dallas point of view, Ben, in terms of Luka, Kyrie, role players, were you shocked by anything? Did anything, is it kind of just what you expected? Um, anything on Luka in particular, or just general thoughts?
Well, Harry, Luka was in Game 3. Luka was +9 when he was on the court.
Okay, mini rant. Ben, get me started. The +9 thing. Can we stop with the +9? It's not about +9, okay? That wasn't the point. But they do this thing where, like, if you like a player and he plays like garbage, well, you'd be like, he did, like Nick Wright was saying this. He's like, he did play like garbage, but he was still a +9, right? So he still had a positive impact. But they never do it the opposite way. They'll never do it where Luka was a -9 and the team lost by 7, let's say, where they were +2 without him on the court. I forget. There was one game where like Luka was a minus and without him they were a positive, right? They'll never bring up those games, but they'll only use it when the guy played like absolute garbage, and they'll be like, well, he was a +9. Like, shut up. Plus minus is literally the dumbest stat outside of maybe defensive rating, because defensive rating is a pure team stat, which is a whole rant for another day. But Ben, that's your fault. I'm blaming Ben for that.
Well, I did that on purpose. Uh, yeah, I mean, Luka,
You agree with me, by the way, right? Plus minus is horrendous.
I mean, it's a very nuanced stat. Yeah, like, I mean, the biggest problem with it was people pick and choose. I mean, besides for just using stats in general, like you're saying, people are going to look back on this, oh, he had good numbers, but like, he played like a trash can. Because if you watch the game, he played, by number one players on a team's standards, he played bad. Forget the
You know what? I
defense.
just thought of a great name for
Offensively,
this
he played bad.
podcast. We should name it the Eye Test. That would be a good name. Because we're big eye test guys. Like you're saying, like you got to turn on the game, right? Like anyone who watched this playoff series and thought Luka Doncic played well, needs their eyes checked. Period. That's the end. But outside of if I didn't give you any numbers and I just told you watch all 5 games and say how did Luka play, no one would come out saying he's playing good, including his mother.
Hey man, yeah, I think they need to do like the blind resume test. So just everyone has to watch the tape, but we like AI it so that all the players look physically the same, and you just tell me which one's playing good and which one's playing bad. And yeah, he played bad. Um, I think just to bring up for fun, is he actually better than James Harden? Elite offensive player who at a certain point in the playoffs plays terrible. That's a conversation. But to be nuanced, the players 3 through however many are on the roster, 3 through 11, 13 or whatever, they all were literally zeros. Kyrie was pretty close to zero, so I mean that's just a tough environment to be a good basketball player in. Um, but I
Yeah,
mean, he
just
was
to
pretty
just to
bad.
clear things up, as much as we're bashing Luca, was he the number one reason they lost? No. Was he the number two reason they lost? No. But I think we just expected more from the conversations he was being put in. Is the point?
He might be the number one reason they lost game one. Legitimately, he might have lost them game one.
Just because of
Um,
defense you're talking about.
he had I think poor efficiency in that game and egregious defense. So like that's probably the number one reason you lost. If the guy's gonna get 35% usage percentage, play mediocre, and get cooked on defense. Whereas game two is probably yeah, whatever. Regardless, any all-time conversation at this point is ridiculous. I think he will win an MVP. He will win the MVP next season, barring injury. He has so much momentum behind him. People think he should have won it this year. We saw it with Jokic, where 2 years ago people thought he got cheated, and then this year, in basically a three-way tie, kind of ish as people view it, they gave it to him. And so Luka, if he does anything similar to this year, he will be winning the MVP next year. But generally, I think this run was a fluke. I don't expect them to be back. Um, in certain ways, might be similar to a Hawks team that we know about. But we'll see about that.
Yeah, in terms of the Mavs' future, do I see them coming back and being in this situation? I don't. I think the West is only going to get better. You have the Timberwolves, who I think Anthony Edwards is going to take another step. Then you have the Thunder, who I think are going to add some pieces. We'll talk about that next episode when we talk about the offseason stuff. I think the Thunder are primed for a big offseason. The Suns, I don't really buy anymore. The Lakers, I don't really buy anymore. But the Nuggets, I think, will be back right where they are. I think the Mavs just their road to the finals kind of lined up nicely for them in terms of they didn't have to play Denver. Do I think they would have beat Denver? No, probably not. So that's just the way the cookie crumbles. The same thing with Boston. Like, would Boston beat Denver? No. So I think Minnesota low-key deserves like a tiny ring. Boston should send them a ring just because it made their job so much easier. Not that they couldn't have beat Denver, but in the regular season they struggled. And and just the way the state of the Western Conference is nowadays, it's just only going to get better, and there's too much star power for a team that's not a super team to be consistently making the finals, right? This Dallas team it has talent. Obviously, Luka's probably a top 5 player in the world. Kyrie's probably a top 20, 25 player in the world. And, they have some other somewhat pieces. And like Ben talked about before, they have some of their picks. But again, like the West is just too talented for like a 2-star and like mediocre supporting cast team to just be consistently knocking on the door of the finals. Unless Dallas has a move in their bag, I don't see it. Not that they won't be competitive; they'll be in the mix, like the same where they were this year, where they'll just be one of the teams that could potentially make the finals, maybe. But I don't see them becoming this team that's going to build upon this and next year maybe take another step and win the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I don't see a next step for any of the players on the roster. Like all the players kind of are what they are. I do think players 3 through 13 are outside of Lively are upgradable. So even if they don't get another star, if they get two, upgrades there in the offseason, like that would be their path to becoming a better team.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do this offseason. I mean, Gafford also, that's how they made the conference finals this year. I mean, the NBA finals this year, excuse me, is they added Derek Jones and Gafford and Lively, right? So that's what kind of took them the next step. So they need some similar pieces to kind of take that next step. Um, yeah, so I agree with you. Boston's not an all-time great team. They just when you look at all-time great teams, they're just lacking that super duper star player. Tatum is like a top 6'5" ish guy by default, kind of like because like who else is going to be there? But yeah, he's not quite that guy, and I think that kind of eliminates the conversation. Where we disagree is if they won 3 rings, we'll see where. The NBA Finals is over. Obviously, everyone's talking about Mavericks, Celtics, this, Tatum, Brown, Luka. But let's take a step back and look at some of our predictions, what we thought would happen going into the playoffs. and kind of what we could learn potentially for the future when making predictions. Was anything shocking this playoffs? Was anything kind of as we expected? So I guess let's go back to the first round. You have your bracket pulled up there, Ben. All right, so why don't you start going through your bracket?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit. Oh, no worries, no worries. Um,
So why
Putting
don't you
here, I
go through your
think.
bracket and yeah, sorry, why don't you go through your bracket and see what you got wrong, what you got right, and things you could learn, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, Thunder Pelicans, not a whole lot of conversation there. Clippers Mavs, not a whole lot of conversation there, I don't think. Um, Timberwolves Suns. This was Suns dominated the Timberwolves in the regular season, and they lost four straight. So maybe there's a lesson in that. And then Nuggets Lakers, not really anything surprising there. Um, First round on the Eastern side, Celtics Heat, not much there, I
Well,
don't
let
think.
me throw something in, Ben. If Kawhi's healthy for the Clippers Mavs, are the Mavs done in round one?
It would. I forget exactly how that series went. He missed most of it, right?
Yeah, he barely played.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think it's for sure. I think it's a coin flip.
Okay.
Um, then on the Eastern side, Celtics Heat, Cavs Magic, Bucks Pacers, Knicks 76ers was probably the most interesting one. Um, I kind of think the 76ers were a better team. They got off to a slow start, and then they, in the first couple games and too deep a hole. But I think if that was a 11 game series, I would probably pick the Sixers. So I think really my biggest takeaways is Western Conference semis where we got Thunder Mavericks and then well really not like that but Thunder Mavericks and then Timberwolves Mavericks where like Thunder and Timberwolves if you need to have lost in the playoffs for me to take you seriously against another good team that has lost in the playoffs like you need for whatever reason you need to have that equity and Thunder and Timberwolves literally had zero and it showed.
Yeah, I
Um,
think going into the playoffs, people, were down on the Thunder just because they hadn't done there before, and some are like, "Oh, that's unfair." It's not. If you watch NBA basketball, it's not. You don't just go from nothing to winning the championship, right? There's steps to this. There's levels to this. So I don't think I was, too surprised. I think I picked the Thunder to win that series, but I was never going to pick them to win the finals. So I think we agree. Playoff experience is a real thing, and you're saying you would never pick a team that just came out of nowhere and pick them to do anything real in the playoffs.
No, and I think I had some of that, fourth after I was watching the games, probably overreacted a little bit. And then the Timberwolves did beat the Nuggets, so does that mean the team with no equity beat the team with equity? I don't. That doesn't really change my opinion. Like their whole roster was constructed to beat the Nuggets, and I think we
And,
both
well,
kind of feel that the Nuggets were actually better than the Timberwolves.
well, to throw in
So
also in terms of equity, the Timberwolves did play the Nuggets last season in the playoffs, so there is some of
yeah,
that
okay,
too.
sure. Um, yeah, I mean that's probably my biggest take. I mean, on the other side of the bracket, Pacers Knicks, I did not care about that series. Celtics Cavs also didn't really care. Celtics Pacers didn't really care. I mean, yeah, that's probably my biggest takeaway is you gotta have that equity. And to me, I still think the Timberwolves are better than the Nuggets. I mean, the Nuggets are better than the Timberwolves.
Yeah, the Timberwolves. People like the kind of the general take was they just ran out of gas. I don't really view it like that. I view it as they built their whole team to play Denver, and then they beat Denver, and they're like, oh shoot, there's other teams left, right? That's kind of how I view it. Just with the two big men to stop Jokic and things like that, right? So yeah, I just don't think the Timberwolves were a fully well constructed roster. I think they have, Anthony Edwards, obviously a potential superstar, and the two big men. But outside of that, they kind of didn't complete their roster to the point where they're a real title contender. So I think that's where they really started lacking. But I think my other big takeaway from the playoffs is don't be afraid. The young up and coming team, they can beat, you know, that team that's kind of falling off. You don't fully believe in. The Timberwolves beating the Suns, things like that, or the Timberwolves beating the Nuggets. I mean, it's kind of a little bit the opposite of what you're saying, but I don't think a team could come out of nowhere and win the title. But going to that Phoenix Wolves series, that was probably the most shocking series of the playoffs. The last game of the regular season, the Suns beat the Timberwolves in a game that both teams cared about by a significant margin, and I think they were 3-0 this year or 3-1 in the regular season. And the Timberwolves just absolutely stomped them. It's this is probably the last season to put that final nail in the coffin of the Steph, LeBron, KD era in terms of playoff success, at least. Um, but yeah, it just wasn't too great of a playoffs, honestly. Like there wasn't too many compelling storylines. A lot of injuries. A lot of the superstars that we know and love, the Steph Curry's, LeBron James's, Embiid's, Giannis. whatever it is. They kind of a lot of them missed the playoffs or got injured or whatever it was. So, good for Boston. Shout out to Boston. They had a great regular season and they capped it off with a title. And shout out to Dallas for overachieving. I enjoyed the Timberwolves Maverick series, and again, I think on the Western side it was a little bit more interesting. But as an overall, it just felt like injuries played a massive factor.
Yeah, it's like the very end. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean the thing that like you're saying, it's the end of the Steph, LeBron, KD era. To me, we're officially there. I've been saying this for a little while, but like you're saying, they officially got stomped out at this point. And outside of Jokic, I don't believe in any of these stars are on the level of those three guys. So we're gonna. I mean, there'll be storylines, when Giannis is in it, but and Jokic. I think Giannis, Jokic, and Luka are the big three now, but I don't take them as seriously as those other guys. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And honestly, like, I mean, Steph and LeBron are top 10 players all time, but consensus probably, and KD's probably in that 15 range. So it's like, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to beat that level of player. But, they're still great players for their age, is where they're at in their career now. But, I think it's championship contenders, unless they joined, a stacked team. Like if you replace Tatum with Durant, I don't think they would fall off. But yeah, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And the Pacers signed Siakam to a 4-year, $189 million extension, which is massive. Now I know the cap is going to go up, right? So that's what people are going to say. But Siakam being a core member of your team, I don't know if I buy it. He was the second best player in the championship team in Toronto, but I don't think he's that same player anymore. He doesn't have that same explosiveness, that same burst. But what the real storyline here is the Pacers traded for Siakam at the trade deadline, and in the back of their mind, part of that trade was we're also signing this guy to extension. I don't know if it was a wink wink with Siakam or not, but this is an overpay, and this is pretty much eliminating them from ever being in title contention, in my opinion. They technically made the conference finals this year, right? But like, did they really? You know what I'm saying? Like, they were like, there's always that one team that makes the conference finals that's like not really supposed to be there, but they just like happen to sneak through because of whatever reason. They locked themselves out of contention. Period. Paying Siakam whatever it is, $40-$45 million ain't gonna lead you to no championship contention. So, but it was, and that's I think part of the reason why by the NBA trade deadline it's a little bit quieter because teams realize if you make that big move, you're locking in long term, and teams like the flexibility, particularly where the NBA cap is going and the rules and the taxes and things like that, right? So the Pacers made that decision that it's worth it for not only us to give up these players or these picks or whatever it is, but also to pay him $45 million and make him a big part of our future. What's for Indiana, again, I don't think every team in the NBA is trying to win a championship, and I think Indiana is one of those teams. They're just happy to be in the playoffs. They're happy to win a playoff series or two like they did this year, fill the stadium, make some money. They're not really in it to win a championship. But did you think along the same lines as me, or did you not really find the Siakam signing that interesting?
Yeah, yeah, exactly like you said. When they traded for Siakam, they were They part of that calculation was we're good paying him $45 million, and so and I agree with it. That's a calculation that says we are not going to be a championship. We are not winning a championship. He just turned 30. It's a 4-year deal, not a 5-year deal, so it's a little better. Yeah, 42 million, 45 million, 49 million, 52 million. So not quite the Jaylen Brown, max or the Tatum max that's coming up, but a big number. Yeah, they will not be winning a championship. Looking at the Pacers, they have, I believe, their 2025 pick and their 2027 pick, but I don't know if they can trade those.
Yeah, because you can't trade every year. You have to trade every other year. So they might not be able to trade those. Maybe they can make it a swap with somebody. But also, they're not going to be bad enough to get like the Cooper Flags of the world, because they're going to have Halliburton and Siakam. So they're kind of stuck in that middle. And I really don't understand this move. I mean, I understand it from the point of they already made the trade, but like from the point of making that trade, I guess they made a conference finals out of it. So, but again, they're just not in it to win a championship.
Yeah, I mean, and this was a point I brought up when we did take one of this was like I think I got this from Nick Wright. Like the Celtics were a 10-year, decade-long build. They started with trading Kevin Garnett. That's how they got the picks for Brown and Tatum. Yes, I had to add players on the back end, but they went through a lot of different players. They went through Kyrie. They went through Kemba Walker. You know, they did it in a way where they built their thing, and they were able to get second and third tier stars to keep them in the playoff mix even while they were building. But to build a true championship contender, you need to. It's a decade-long process, and like, yeah, you're a business, so you need to stay entertaining during that time while you're building. But you can't if you're mortgaging assets and future cap space just for that middle goal of being just in the playoffs and winning a playoff series. Like, that's a little bit just disappointing as for a fan base. And it kind of makes me rethink, with the Hawks, what they're going to be doing. Where like Trae Young might not be. I mean, we don't need to do the Hawks podcast right now, but this might be a slow build. Trae Young might not be on the next Hawks team if you want to win a championship, mostly because of the patience he's going to have and things like that. Um, Whatever. That's a conversation for another day. But yeah, not going to be a championship winning team. I think they'll be lucky to make another conference finals. Um, is what it is.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to throw in before we wrap up this podcast is the Jaylen Brown contract. People are now like, oh, that's a good contract. He just won Finals MVP. Like, I guess you won the championship, so like you're happy, right? You're not upset about the contract, but that's not a good contract. Still, he's still tremendously overpaid. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, like again, the ultimate goal is to win a championship. But it's like, oh, now people said that was a bad contract, and now he won, Finals MVP. It's still a bad contract, right? If the Warriors gave Andre Iguodala when he won Finals MVP, $60 million, that wouldn't be a good contract just because you won the Finals MVP, right? So, I mean, we'll see how it goes moving forward. But I think at some point that will come to haunt them because I don't think he's that level of player. But, I think they're happy in this moment that they kept Jaylen Brown, they kept the core together. And it's a rare scenario where you have a core and you keep it together for 10 plus years or whatever it is, eight plus years, and you push it all the way through until you win the championship and you keep pushing forward. It makes you think also about those Thunder teams, if KD or if they never traded Harden, if they just gave it a couple more shots, could they have gotten over that hump? It's something to think about. And maybe teams are going to be more likely to keep their core and just keep pushing forward, adding pieces, adjusting, tinkering, things like that.
Well, let's
But that,
not
I think
let's not call Jaylen Brown Andre Iguodala. I mean, it's an overpay. Jaylen Brown is legitimately a $40 million player, right? 40 to 50, right? The Pascal Siakam contract. I would assume we would say he's at
right.
least as good as Pascal Siakam.
Well,
He's
that's
get
another overpay. So I'm not going to base it
okay,
off what he. That's the
40
market. It's
million.
the market.
The market is the market, but like I think as far as I know with the Celtics, they have another year of literally the same roster. They might lose like Sam Hauser. Um, it's not this coming year. It's 2 years where they're going to start to lose some pieces. But in the NBA, you're not building 5-year windows anymore. Like with the rules, it's just not happening. If they get another like they'll have this coming season. If they can extend it out one more season after that and win a championship one of the next 2 years, I mean that's about as successful as it gets.
No, yeah, 100%. And I wasn't saying he was Andre Iguodala as a player. My point was just because he won Finals MVP doesn't mean the contract is worth it. But again, it's also like you give Mahomes a fat contract, right? And like all the money is towards the end of the contract, like it progressively gets worse and worse, and then you win a title in the first year of the contract. I don't even know if the contract's kicked in for Jaylen Brown yet, by the way, right? And it's
It
like, oh, the
hasn't.
contract was worth it, right? It hasn't even kicked in yet, right? So, obviously you're happy that you won a championship and everything like that, but I think where it really kicks in and affects you is towards the end of that contract, which hasn't even started yet. So, yeah, that was my point. But I think we're gonna wrap it up with that. Next episode, we're gonna do NBA offseason preview. Maybe we'll touch on some NFL contracts. Might start shifting towards that, but I think it's still gonna be NBA for a little while, next couple of weeks, while we get into some drafts, some offseason, some predictions, things like that. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and YouTube at the Agendas Pod, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.